This would be the third installment today and certainly not planned. But the topic of grief and the process of grief during the coronavirus pandemic. Grief, and many of us have already experienced it, usually the result of death of a loved one, is difficult enough. I remember when my mother died at home, and the undertakers came and wrapped her body in a white sheet on a stretcher and carried her out of the bedroom, through the living room, and out the front door as we sat in the living room watching them. And I remember once her body was out of the house and the room was empty, her bedroom was empty, this feeling of just grasping at the air, trying to retrieve her presence. Because even when she was dying and she was laying in the bed, she was still there. She was still there. And once they removed her body from the house, that's when she really wasn't there. So the initial shock of absence is difficult enough. I can't imagine those who've lost loved ones to this virus, because not only do they have to cope with the immediate absence, but they've had to deal with the absence of their loved one for days, maybe weeks at a time, before their death occurs. I just can't imagine it. I've been observing lately in my personal life, there's a grieving process at play, because I have to get accustomed to the absence of somebody who had occupied my days in my home. And I discovered that even the fiber in the fabric that still holds DNA, the sort of space-occupying areas of the sofa and the other rooms of the house. When I'm in the kitchen preparing my own dinner, there's this sort of ghost of space that used to be either standing at the stove or beside me at the cutting board. The ghostly space-occupying power of an absent loved one. They do leave behind something. And when we're grieving, we have to walk through all that. We have to move through the spaces where they were. We have to walk through the ghostly outline of the places where they were. It's as if we can feel them. We can feel them. We certainly experience them psychologically, spiritually. I just still, how do the grieving families who are separated by plexiglass or 2 miles, who are waiting for the outcome of their loved one's condition, sitting in an ICU, off limits? How many ghostly spaces do they have to move through? And then after they've passed their loved ones, and they have to internalize the reality that those spaces they occupied will never be filled again. I waited on an older lady when I was a table server. We used to call ourselves waitresses at Denny's family restaurant back in the 80s. She was lean and sinewy, the kind of old hippie that had retained her physical health. She had a spring in her step and she had a lot of energy. And she would come in and order the breakfast every day at roughly the same time. And we got to talking about her husband who had died. And I asked her if she ever thought she heard him. Did he ever communicate with her? She goes, "Oh, of course, every day." "Really?" I said. And she said, "Oh, sure." And then I sort of ventured, "You mean, how? You hear his voice?" And she said, "He does. He talks to me." And I remember filling her coffee and walking away and carrying that concept, that impression for hours thereafter. In fact, it never left me. 40, 50 years later, how many years ago has it been? When were the 80s? That many years ago. I now can say that when I think about someone who's died that I've loved, whether it be my mother or my father or someone else that I've loved very much, if in my head, inside me, I ask the question, if I ask a question of this person, I get an answer in their voice, the way they would speak to me. I get an answer. My brain, my mind formulates how they would answer the question using their voice. It's not audible, but I hear it in my thoughts and it comes to me. I don't fill in the blanks. My mind does it, or they do. They come in and they speak to me. So I now understand what the little old lady meant at Denny's back in the 80s. And now I'm probably pretty close to how old she was when she came to patronize the restaurant. There was something else I was going to add to that with respect to hearing the voice, and it has slipped my mind. But maybe it'll come to me before I close this chapter. Grief. I took some notes here. Yeah, the body remembers and informs the mind. What else did I write? That was pretty much it. Oh, I know what it was. And this is what I intended to close with. Since right now in my world, I am grieving literally the loss of the presence of someone that I thought had returned to me, and find it palpable and sort of all-encompassing, given the amount of thought time that I devoted to the relationship, which was pretty constant. Being in the pandemic and being in a shutdown and sharing my space with him, where can we go? I can't leave the house to get away from it. I can't go anywhere that I hadn't already gone with him. What? To take a walk at the cemetery? Drive? He's still there. He was there when I did those things. A couple years ago, I was in his car riding with him, and we were talking about the woman that he had known for so many years, and who had passed away from cancer. And I told him that I had asked her the same kind of question I asked my mother or my father. I asked her a question about him and whether I would be able to be successful dealing with him on a certain level. And I remember getting from a woman I had never met the phrase, "Good luck." Almost fatalistic, like, if you can do it, you're better than I was. And you know, he kind of chuckled ironically, and now I know why. But I believe now that I did hear from her and that she meant what she said. And so we grieve. We've all been grieving during this crisis. We grieve for those who've lost loved ones. We grieve as we imagine those laying on gurneys, on ventilators, not very conscious, if at all. We grieve for the healthcare workers and their families. And we grieve for ourselves, our collective, the quandary in which we find ourselves, politically and otherwise. And that grief is palpable. We're feeling it with every cell in our body. This is my outlet. I turn the camera on and I speak into it. If it bounces back, or if it bounces off of you, I hope that there was some benefit presented and given of me to you. Fauci and his crew are on record over here. I'm recording on C-SPAN the entire coronavirus response, and I'm going to listen to the rest of it when I can stay on task. Thanks again for your visit. God help you as you grieve.